Hi everyone, welcome to our roundtable on the new models for the supplier risk renaissance. Let me introduce you to someone I know very well, and we are working together on quite a lot of great engagement. So Chris McCartney, who is a partner at KPMG. He's the executive sponsor of High Value Add KPMG Alliance. And he led quite a few, the delivery of quite a few complex engagements with, together with us at Meritor, Honeywell, as well as the state of Arizona. My name is Jean-Manuel Bulukian. It's too complicated, so I feel good if you call me JMB. I joined the company 2 years ago as the head of alliances for MRI-PAC, and now I'm in charge of Asia Pacific and the LATAM region. Just before starting, let's go through a very quick poll to understand who is on this call today. And Brian, yeah, good. So everybody knows how to do this poll? Okay, good. Good.
All right.
A lot of people from North America.
A good cross-industry mix here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good balance in terms of company size.
Right.
Okay. Good. Thanks a lot for your participation. I think it's interesting to understand who you are. That will help Chris and I to really tune the presentations towards your expectations as well. Just a few housekeeping items. You can submit your questions through the chat, so please don't hesitate. Even during the presentation that Chris and I are going to do. And please, after this keynote that will last for 25 minutes, you're welcome to join the final keynote, which is going to be on maximizing the supplier resiliency, done by Aurea Jimenez, a VP of Indirect Procurement at Flextronics. So, we're still admitting some people. Excellent. So, as you know, the new COVID conditions have hit the supply chain the hardest. I mean, it's considered as a 50% versus just 25% for internal operations. Whereas procurement impact on enterprises is just recognized to be extremely significant above all other drivers. We've seen in the last 8 months a massive shift in the CPO agenda. I mean, as per some recent studies that we made together with external parties earlier this year, the typical top three priorities of the CPO before COVID was digital transformation, improving processes, and increased agility. And now it has moved massively towards cash management, increased savings, and of course, improving the supply chain visibility. So 1 year ago, the item of the risk in the CPO program that was the least covered, on all the items of the CPOs, the least covered item was supplier risk, with just 34% of all businesses having an active supplier risk program. And it's fascinating because in the poll, we have 38%. So we're not that far off, right? And just 21% of those programs were targeted to strategic suppliers risk, whereas, I mean, they impact, of course, directly our business results. So just a little more data on this. The ratio of strategic purchases as external spend is 70% in financial services, 60% in manufacturing, consumer product and healthcare, oil and gas and chemicals, 55% in high tech, and 48% in public sector. So in this challenging context, let's look together at the operating models that can help to fulfill this gap. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, JMB. Just do a sound check. Can you hear me? Great. Again, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'll try to actively monitor the chat here. I know there's a couple of familiar faces and names out there. So whether you have a question or you're just trying to heckle me, please feel free to chime in as we move along here. Once again, my name is Chris McCarney. I'm a partner in KPMG's procurement advisory practice, and I serve as the executive sponsor for our iValue Alliance. Alliance at which we're very proud of. We recently received for the third year in a row the iValue Partner of the Year. So when they asked us to present today, we're happy to jump right in and share some of our insights. So we'll jump right to it, and we'll start with some data based on a survey that we conducted right in early 2020. And we went out to 1,100 risk type executives across 14 countries, and we kind of whittled it down to about 6 industries that we covered, kind of high level industry demographics. And so here are some of the results when we started to ask about supplier risk. It's not lost on us that we weren't surprised, I should say, to see that 77% of those participants did view supplier risk management as a strategic priority. But what's interesting is that when we dug in deeper and we asked about what types of risk, and we talked specifically about reputational risk, that was tied to the supply chain. So that we found that fascinating as our clients on a global basis looked at their supply chain. It wasn't about supply risk or continuity of supply. It came down to an external party that ultimately was impacting their reputational risk. And we saw that as a sign of really, as organizations put more and lean more on their suppliers, rely more on their suppliers, their agendas are really kind of interwoven, and there are reputations at risk. And at that time, no surprise, 74 of those respondents said, hey, we have a really urgent need to really, it's not about not doing anything, but it was about making SRM more consistent. At the same time, half of those respondents said that they just don't have the capabilities at all, either in-house or with third parties. And they were looking to technology to really build those capabilities. Now, some of them, only about a quarter of them were using technologies, but it was very apparent in this data that our clients are looking towards technology to move forward their supplier risk management agenda. And so the conclusion we came to is kind of stepping back and looking at all these data points is that organizations are really eager to scale. They're really eager to advance their supplier risk programs, supplier risk management. In many cases, it's a function of ROI, technology investment that they're hesitant to move forward. They have things in place that are highly manual, but they really are looking at this space more than ever, to advance their procurement agenda. So some of the common challenges that we see in supplier risk or supplier risk management programs, and now I won't drain this slide, but I'll call one out. I mean, some of this should be motherhood and apple pie to us, but the one that we found the most interesting is this notion of the inability to really simulate the impact of risk. We talk a lot about, this top one about risk being done in silos across an enterprise or stratification of risk, which we can come back to. But this notion of the inability to really model and simulate risk is really holding back our clients from investing in supplier risk. If I step back and I look at the risk equation is about probability and impact. I think if we look across the last year or any major events or impacts we've seen to supply chains, probability has historically been really, really low. But our ability to quantify and model that impact has historically not been there. And so when we can't bring probability and impact together and simulate that, we have a really hard time building a business case around a risk program. And that's, when we stitch all that information together and we look at that, we say, well, we think this is what's holding back our clients from investing in these programs, because they can't put a business case together and they can't demonstrate an ROI, to build out these programs. So as we look at the trends now that we see in supplier risk, we can walk through some of these, and JMB, I welcome you to chime in. When I step back and look at these, it's interesting. These are, I believe, a reflection of our clients' broader digital transformation agenda at the enterprise level. And this is that supplier risk version of those. But when I think about things like continuous monitoring, automation, and this notion of self-service, looking at a target operating model, which we're going to talk about here in a bit, and end-to-end integration, these are parts of kind of a broader digital agenda that our clients are moving through, some struggling with, frankly, at the enterprise level. And it's reflected as well as they address their supply risk management.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this the item on the target operating model and the governance. I mean, for those who haven't heard, one of our keynote speaker, the General McChrystal, he was talking about this trend of really empowering the level of the organizations that is as close as possible to the event. Whereas, the CPO or the executive of procurement or supply chain are sitting somewhere, the event can happen somewhere else. And there is the need to get the data for the people who are facing really the risk, and of course the ability to answer very quickly. When everybody saw the impact of the Suez Canal, this is certainly not something you can sit on for days or weeks, because it can have really devastating impacts. So that's also one, the empowerment, and two, the speed and the accuracy of the data that you get from there, that are absolutely pivotal to make the right decisions and mitigate the risks.
Yeah. I think one of the ones that really stands out on this page to us as well is this notion of convergence. When we think about supply chain modeling and predictive risk management, this notion of the convergence or the bringing together of multiple data sources is quite significant and quite paramount and prevalent in this space. If I go back a year ago, right about this time, we had clients, I can think of one client in particular that, CPO called and said, Chris, I'm trying to figure out, how many force majeure clauses are in my contracts, and I need to know that. I said, well, that's great, but even if you were to find out you have a force majeure clause in a contract, do you know what part of your supply chain is at risk and how that force majeure clause is going to impact? What's the result of that? And so it's not just about the contractual data that he was looking for, but it's also about the operational data that he had to bring together to truly understand his exposure. And so when we think about convergence and multiple data sources coming together in order to kind of properly model, assess, predict, and really address risk, that's what I think about with convergence. And so, and again, as the survey and the data says, and what we're seeing with our clients, that's a pretty hot topic as we address supply chain risk. Now, all of that, and what we're really kind of here to talk about today is, and this is, a high level, so I welcome the opportunity to dig into this more with everybody. But this notion of the operating model, this is a term, the operating model or the target operating model is a term that I think we throw around a lot. I know as consultants, we do that. I think, our partners out there throw that term around quite a bit, but here's how we break it down. We break it down into multiple components, and we think each one of these components is critical to getting that supplier risk management operating model right. So the first one is the service delivery model. So if we think about service delivery and the services that the procurement function or the risk management function is accountable for delivering back into the enterprise, who's doing that? What are they doing? What are the boundaries of those services? That's when we talk about service delivery model. And we think it starts there. What services are you trying to give back into the enterprise? How are you serving, whether it's operations or otherwise, how are you serving the business through your supplier risk management function? And then of course, there's governance and controls, right? And so this is the policies governing supplier risk and supply chain risk. These are the roles and responsibilities. What are the escalation paths? Like, how are we really going to get our arms around and govern this risk management function? Now, process we're going to come back to in a second. We all love to talk about process and how things work and what are the steps along the way. But this becomes a critical path item when we look at the operating model and we break down how supplier risk gets managed and how things get done in this space. And clearly a significant portion of the operating model is process. Roles and responsibilities, we touched a little bit of that on governance and controls, but this is really key to who does what. I can tell you that as a firm, we KPMG, risk management is in our genetic makeup, whether it's our Big Four accounting heritage and the markets we serve, but risk management is really in our DNA, and we serve clients in a risk capacity, in a risk assessment and a risk management capacity all over. It's not just procurement, it's finance, it's IT, like risk. Folks in the functions of the organization and in operations are managing risk everywhere. So defining those roles and responsibilities in around the risk management agenda is critical to getting this operating model right. Because I tell you, some organizations we walk into and we say, okay, who's responsible for risk management? And everybody raises their hand. You go, that's the right answer, but now let's talk about it at a detailed level. And then there's a monitoring and testing component that we bring into bear when we talk about the operating model for risk. Monitoring and testing on an ongoing basis is, we believe, critical to risk management operations. And then last but not least become the supporting technology and the data and reporting. I don't think we'd be here today in an iValua conference if technology and data weren't imperative to this process. As the survey showed earlier, our clients are absolutely looking to technology to underpin their risk management transformation, if you will, to automate process, to remove manual intervention in risk management. And frankly, that's the only way we see forward in this space, is there has to be some level of technology enablement today. And then of course there's data and reporting, as I mentioned, understanding that data either to take a backwards looking view or to predict and report on what you see coming in the future. I do think I saw something pop up in the chat. 5 minutes left, I got the warning. So let's double tap on that process real quick, and I will keep it brief. We did talk about that process layer in the target operating model. And as we look at that, we do believe there's kind of multiple dimensions, and we look at it more of a life cycle view more than anything. And it starts with due diligence into contracting with that external party. That monitoring function comes into play there. As I said, we believe that's really important when we talk about risk. And then there's either the offboarding or the termination. And there's a whole planning cycle that goes along with this. What's key is that we believe proper supply risk management or supplier risk management should be integrated tightly with source to pay. And every step of the way, every component, whether again, it's from onboarding to execution, monitoring, to ultimately termination of that relationship with the supplier, has a risk management component to it. And the relationship between the two needs to be tightly monitored. And with that, I think J&B, you want to talk a little bit more about our alliance and some of the things that we bring to bear in this space.
Let me unmute. Okay, yes. I will talk briefly about 2 points. The one is the 360-degree visibility. I mean, you need to have the view on the whole supplier risk, and you need to have really a single view of all suppliers throughout the S2P. That's what Chris just mentioned in the slide before. Understand the supplier dependencies, interdependency, and also stay on top of the supplier performance. The second one about the open ecosystem is really the need to build an aggregation of partners, you know. So because the risk around suppliers, it's not only the traditional data about supplier information, financial supplier financial performance, but also the sanction list with the OFAC, the anti-bribery, labor health and safety, diversity status, conflict minerals when it's applicable in some industries, it's very key, sustainability, and of course the news monitor and the adverse media. And as Alex was saying this morning, and for those who have not seen him, we are not supermen, you know, or superwomen, not superheroes. We cannot do it all. So we need to have this aggregation of partners that help us to cover the whole the diversity of the risk and bring to our clients the data that they need in order to make the right decisions. The technology, of course, Chris talked about it, and I think KPMG and Ivalia work pretty well together on how to aggregate the platform, the processes, and the change of the economic model, and make that happen fairly quickly. And of course, you know, the global reach is also key because, again, back in the poll, considering the percentage of the attendance here of companies that have a significant size, I assume that you have a global reach, and you need really on the other side of the planet to be able to understand what the risks are. So, and last but not least, the delivery track record, because risk is also about experience. And I would say when you have a combination of partners and ecosystem who can maximize the number of years of working together, that gives also a capacity to really manage the expectations.
Okay, JMB, I think we set a new land speed record for presenting. Are there any questions? Maybe we have a minute or so, or 5. If anybody wants to ask a question in the chat. All right. Well, JMB, I think we promised 25 minutes.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
I'm just, sorry, get my mic down by my mouth. Is that better?
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you're talking to your customers and they're looking at their suppliers, how many kind of, I hope I can articulate this correctly, how many like levels of suppliers? Like I want to see my supplier's supplier, or my supplier's supplier, if you get my drift. How many levels down are they looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say what we see today is tier 1 is table stakes. that's definitely true. I think, and it also varies by industry. I think if I look at some of our automotive and industrial clients, and for example, I grew up in aerospace and defense, hardcore aerospace and defense, and it's always been a challenge to understand, you know, this concept of gray market was always out there in high tech, and where is the supplier, that supplier, where's that chip coming from and that motherboard coming from? And it's a component of a component, ultimately goes into an assembly and ultimately goes into, you know, a major system. So for some industries, they've always been seeking that level of transparency. And candidly, it's kind of like you're chasing a unicorn to get that deep. And for other industries, they can stop at tier one, right? In other industries, it's the variation of suppliers that will go into a final product. So, for my colleagues that serve financial services, they'll look at financial services clients are now looking at, can we talk about the supply chain of the finance product that we're putting out? And that's not about tiers as much as it is about how many people are looking at credentializing and opining on that product that you're putting out as a financial services organization. So I'm not sure it's a direct answer, but for every industry it changes, but everybody's trying to understand the number of external parties that are either touching a product, impacting a product from the supply side all the way to ultimate delivery.
Yeah, just to add to that, we see some cases in automotive, whether it's automotive manufacturers or automotive suppliers, that there is need to go up to the tier 3 supplier. But as Chris said, it's not only depend on the industry, but it also depends on exactly what type of risk assessment you want to have. So it's that will also drive the granularity of what you are looking for, and that's why you need to have a good understanding of the business and a good understanding of the drivers of change in the industry to make that decision, because of course it has an impact in terms of costs and in terms of operating model, as Chris mentioned.
Yeah, and I reached for an appendix slide here that we had removed just because we were concerned about time. But regardless of depth and how many layers down we go, we absolutely believe in this notion of segmenting the supply base, segmenting the risk, and ultimately support predictive risk management. But regardless of how deep you want to go, that segmentation we believe is really a critical component of your operating model. Hope that helped.
Yeah, good. No, that's very interesting. And I think it definitely depends on the industry, where some may be worried about sanction lists or,
right.
My tier 1 is not, but they're doing business with someone that is, and I'm in aerospace, for example. So, all those, there's just a lot of moving parts into it. It's not a real linear type of relationship always. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. I know early on in the survey results, you noted that reputation came up a little bit heavier than you had expected. Do you see any correlations between the risk associated with reputation and some of the ESG measures that are kind of developing globally?
Yeah, absolutely. J&B when I were talking about this as we were prepping for this session. Yeah. So with the rise of this supplier and supply chain risk agenda, and ESG is on everybody's mind, there is absolutely a connection between these two. And one of the comments I probably failed to make was this notion of supplier risk takes different form for different industries. If I look at, for example, the ESG agenda is a great one. Now, it's not so much about supplier risk, but the same ideas around visibility and transparency in your supply chain are supporting, how much business are you doing with small, disadvantaged, minority-owned businesses, right? If you're a government client, that's really important, and you're governed by statute in many cases and law and where those dollars need to go. Right, and you're bound by that, and so that transparency that you use to manage risk also ties to the ESG agenda. I think it's a great point, and it's really kind of an active conversation in the ESG agenda is right now.
And also, I mean, that's the volatility of the emergence of risk, especially in ESG, that is critical, because suddenly you can have sanctions on the country where you do have your critical suppliers, and then you have to move your spend very quickly. How can you do that? And we've seen both KPMG and iValua examples where some of clients have to move hundreds of millions, if not billions of spend from quote unquote one day to another without disrupting the supply chain. And that's an enormous challenge. It's an enormous challenge.
And one of the things, another slide that we pulled that I should have gone to, as we look at this risk space, there are absolutely competing priorities. If I look at, let's just take your kind of average Fortune 500, there is a supplier risk agenda, there is a supply risk agenda, there is an ESG agenda, right? Sometimes, at the risk of, you know, being controversial, those can, you know, hit each other head on. And someone may say, you know, addressing our ESG agenda means one thing for us as an enterprise, but addressing our supply risk means another. How do we make that, you know, an and conversation and not an or conversation? And I think that all comes back to some of the same principles around data integrity, data convergence is what we're hearing, right? And bringing it all together to get a holistic view and make decisions ultimately.
Yeah, and I can see the weighting.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Julie. I'm afraid we need to end this session. Thanks a lot for your participation. Very happy to continue the discussion, Chris and I, on a different format. But I've been told by our marketing friends, and I absolutely still need them as friends, that they are a little bit late and we need to go to the final keynote of the day. Thanks again, Chris, for your participation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.